Pharisee Heresy.
Heresy, Pharisee. Jesus was a Pharisee, and that is no heresy. Jesus was an Hillel Pharisee.
All right, welcome back to the Pharisee Heresy podcast. Dr. Daniel's continuing on his saga through the Roman Empire and
Saga.
the seals and the beasts and all that fun stuff, the crazy stuff.
Ages of empires.
And so I got some questions for you. Last
Okay.
time was heavy. I had to re-listen to it again because it was just.
Me too.
It
I
was
was like, who's this guy talking? What is he even talking about?
It was really good. Despite all the drops and the calls, it was very good. Very helpful. And we kind of got in this last time, but my question is, why are the futurists so set? I guess the preterists as well, like you said, they're set on 7 years of this prophetic fulfillment. They're trying to cram Revelation into 7 years. And I know they get that from Daniel. But Daniel,
Yes.
tell us why.
Oh, the real Daniel. Yeah, I mean,
Please
I can
stand
think
up.
of like probably three main ideas. So, number one, you're going to go back to Daniel and read the prophecy of the 70 weeks of Daniel. And to the futurist perspective, those 70 weeks were not fulfilled. They were paused at the last week. And so there still remains this final week. So if you've got 1 week, you got to cram everything into Revelation in that week, which is 7 prophetic days or 7 years. So you have this 7-year timeline to fit everything in. And then they kind of go along with this idea of like a 3.5 year tribulation after this covenant is broken by the supposed Antichrist, which I think is a misinterpretation of that Daniel passage.
I was actually going to ask about the Antichrist. Lost you there for a second.
So there's one
There we
reason.
go.
I think
Sorry.
a second reason that I think a second reason that futurists really hang on to the 7 years is because the prophecies in Revelation are hard to understand. They're encoded in symbols and thematic language and prophetic language. Like a mountain being cast into the sea. Well, no one's really seen that before, right? Or the moon turning to blood, or the sun doesn't give its light, or the stars fall from heaven, and the waters, a third of the earth being destroyed, a third of the waters being destroyed. All these plagues and vials seem like things that we've never seen before, so it has to be in the future somewhere. So if it's way off in the future and it doesn't pertain to anything that's happened in the last 2,000 years, it makes sense that it's got to fit into this last 7-year idea. And I think the third reason is because it's kind of nice and convenient to think that we're going to get raptured away before all the bad stuff happens, and then the rest of it's going to happen very quickly, and then it will be over. So again, if you're holding on to the idea of this rapture and that we're going to escape all the trumpets and the seals and the bowls and the woes and all those things and the Antichrist and tribulation, if you think that we're going to escape that and we don't have to see any of it, then it makes sense that you wouldn't see any of it in history either. So it's got to take place somewhere in the distant future. So that's where futurists get their name. All this stuff is going to happen in the distant future.
And with your
and
view,
so-
view a
yeah,
lot
go ahead.
With your view, a lot of the bowls and the seals have already taken place. A lot of them during the Roman Empire is the gist I got
Yeah.
last time. Okay.
I think the most of them have, and the further you get along in prophecy, the harder it gets to decipher. Or let me say it this way: the further away from prophetic events having transpired, the easier it is to see prophecy in those events. So we can look back at Daniel's prophecies and say, oh wow, yeah, those all happened. We can see it clearly in this, that, and the other. But when we get closer to our time, I mean, the latest headlines, if you're not really careful, you could interpret into Revelation. If somebody posts a TikTok of the Euphrates River is low, and they say, "Oh, look, Euphrates River is drying up. The seventh bowl has been poured out, and here we are, or sixth bowl. I forget which one it is, but
Donald
and
Trump received his mortal head wound.
yes, Donald Trump received the mortal head wound, or the shot is the mark of the beast,
Too
or the
soon? Too
Neuralink
soon for that one?
too soon. No, that was perfect. Neuralink is the mark of the beast, or all these things. Um, yeah, so that's very much in a futurist paradigm, and the preterists don't really have to worry so much about trying to figure those out because the vast majority of it to them already happened in their 7 years that they have.
It does sound easier to be a preterist.
Yeah, it does sound easier. It's a little confusing though.
I get that. And that's kind of what I liked about conversations with some of the amillennialists I had, because they kind of fit into that preterist camp, I would say, and they are less focused on all the eschatology, and because the people in the futurist camp, they're obsessed with it. Like the Trump thing,
Yeah.
I was joking about it, but it's like there's probably some out there. Are like, oh my gosh, it's just like everyone's the Antichrist. Every year
Right.
there's a new Antichrist, and you actually got cut off. Your first point, you were mentioning the Antichrist. Can you just recap that really quick?
Yeah, the first point was Daniel's prophecy, where he talks about the 70 weeks, and the futurists like to fit the Antichrist in there and saying that he confirms a covenant, but in the midst of the week, he puts a cease to that covenant, and then the tribulation begins. So 3.5 years in, he breaks that covenant. Whereas if you look at the prophecy of Daniel, it applies to the Messiah, confirming the covenant of old that he would fulfill, and then fulfilling that. So he, in the midst of the week, he puts an end to sacrifice and offering. So it's not an abomination that ceases the daily offering. It's he fulfills that aspect of it. And so the prophecy is talking about Messiah, but it's been misapplied to the Antichrist. So now futurists have to put the Antichrist in the middle of a 7 year period.
That's huge. I need to look into that.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a big thing. We can talk about that some. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I've never heard that before.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
a hot
We
take, and
it's
that
a
leads
hot
into my
take.
next question. Is this a new theory? Is this the Daniel theory that you came up with 2 weekends ago? You received it from the
Yeah.
Lord,
Well,
Joseph
the
Smith.
idea of historicism is not a new theory. It was the predominant understanding of the reformers and pretty much all uh, Protestant theologians up until the last 200 years. So uh, the reformers identified the Roman papacy as the seat of the Antichrist or the office of the Antichrist. So Antichrist not being one person at one point in time, but an office, position, or spirit. Um, so you can look at you can read some of the works of the reformers and see how they spoke about that. Martin Luther was very openly saying that, and many others. And then you have people like the guy that wrote Hore Apocalyptica, um, Eliot. What's his first name? Edward Bishop Eliot. Um, it's this huge work. I think it's several volumes here. Yeah, it's 2,500 pages with about 10,000 references. Let me see when it was written. He begun it in 1837. So you can look up Eliot's work. You can look up Grattan Guinness. Let me look when he wrote this. Um, it wasn't. What was his first name? Yeah. Anyways, look up Grattan Guinness. There's lots of
I'll try to leave some of
uh,
these links in the description of the video so you can
yeah. I'll try to
check
get
these
some links
out.
for you
Yeah.
later. Well, the long and short of it is that no, it's not a new theory. However, I mean, historicism isn't something that's fully agreed on every point. I mean, people have different opinions about how certain things played out in history and what they represented. But the concept of historicism is a way of looking at Scripture, right? A way of understanding the the themes and language of prophecy and seeing them play out in history. And now some of these are pretty unanimously agreed upon on how they're understood because they're very clear and we can point them out. And others are a lot less clear, and so people have a little bit differing opinions on what they may point to. Yeah, and so that's some of the stuff I'm trying to work out of how do I give somebody my opinion on what I think um, when I know that there is certainly always room for error and without just giving historicism a bad name because it doesn't have everything laid out perfectly to read like a children's book. You know what I mean? It's still difficult to understand, which is why in several places, even in Revelation, it says this calls for a mind with wisdom. So, do I possess that? No, I'm trying to learn from other people and pray to understand, and not get wrapped up in looking under every rock for the Antichrist, but understanding the overall concept, the overall theme of empires rising and falling according to God's ordained purposes. You know, when Yeshua said, if you have enough faith, you can cast this mountain into the sea, right? Well, the second seal talks about a fiery mountain being cast into the sea. And there's other prophecies talking about mountains being cast into the sea. And so what a mountain represents is a kingdom or an empire. And so when Yeshua said, if you have faith, you can say to this mountain, be cast in the sea. And what he's saying is that you can overcome the systems of the world led by Satan. You can cast those mountains into the sea. Right? So he's not telling us that if we pray hard enough, we can have the power of telekinesis. I actually tried that when I was a kid. I was like, well, this is what the scripture says. So I went into the woods. I was like, all right, Leaf, I'm going to look at you really hard until you move. And if I believe you're going to move, you'll move. And by golly, that leaf never moved.
Yeah, that's
So
not even like a little bit. The
not
wind,
not even a little bit. You know, like Jedi kind of force move. Yeah. The breeze came by. I was like, oh, I got it. You know. Yeah. So, and it's bad understandings like that that lead to really bad theologies too. Like if you just believe enough, all your pains will go away. If you just believe enough, your sickness will go away. You can heal anybody. You can raise somebody from the dead. All these, you know, that gets into like the New Apostolic Reformation movement, where the signs and wonders and all that sort of stuff. But the point is if we start ripping things out of their literary context, we can come up with some really bad uh, theologies or belief systems around the scripture. So,
that faith of a mustard seed,
yeah,
moving mountains.
yeah, and even trees have been referred to as kingdoms. And so, if a mustard seed grows into a tree and all the birds can rest in it, again, it's referring to the kingdom of Messiah that grows from a small bit of faith. And so the context is kingdoms, one kingdom versus the other, defeating the kingdoms of Satan and seeing the growth and flourishing of the kingdom of a God.
This might be out there, but you mentioned the moving the mountains, and I know one of the references he's talking about, I think he's referring to Mount Zion, because they had just left. You know, he flipped over the table. Or no, I think he cursed the fig tree or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Then they came
Yeah.
back and they passed the fig tree and they saw it was all withered. And then he says that thing about, you know, if you have faith enough, you can move. He doesn't say mountains. He says this mountain. You're like, well, what mountain? The only mountain that would be close by would be, you know, the 7 mountains of Mount Zion. But it's
Yeah.
interesting. Like, is he talking about like the apocalypse? You know, the Zechariah where it says Mount Zion will be made a plain, be flattened, or the Mount of Olives is split in two. Is this an apocalypse, day of the Lord kind of thing he's talking about here?
I was just thinking about that actually today, about whether the Zechariah prophecy should be understood literally or metaphorically.
That's
with the
how I was
mountain
taught. It's,
kingdom.
it's hard to me for me to think about things.
But the one thing that keeps me from just jumping to like, yeah, it's talking about a kingdom, is that he talks about like a plane from here to there. I forget where it was, and kind of gives some specifications around it. So it almost seems like it is
Yeah,
literal there.
seems a little
But
specific.
there is a place in Revelation where he talks about like every island will pass away, and there will be no mountains, and so this is, a lot of people say, oh well, that's where all the mountains go away and everything is flattened across the whole earth and there's no more islands. But the whole point is that the kingdoms of the world have become the kingdom of God. So there are no other mountains, and islands are also referred to as kingdoms as well. So it's just saying there's no other kingdoms on earth when his kingdom comes. He is the one mountain, the stone that crushes all the other kingdoms and becomes a mountain, right? That we saw in the picture of Daniel's statue.
And that was kind of my understanding even with Mount Zion is, you have faith enough, God's kingdom will come. It's like it's the flattening of that Mount Zion is because to make way for the new kingdom
Yeah,
of God. So, like I said, it's
absolutely.
a
I think so.
metaphor there as well. Or
Hmm.
well, I guess literal too, literal as well. Like it will be destroyed. I don't know if you believe in the whole city coming down,
Hmm.
the golden cube or whatever it is, the New Jerusalem. What are your thoughts there? We'll add a question onto that one.
Yeah, I mean, as of right now, I think that's a literal city that comes down out of heaven. But yeah, I mean, I'm always open to having a better understanding of that too. So, I mean, it is kind of weird when you think about like how big it is and how many rooms there are in it, where people's like, oh, well, each person will have this many square feet of space to live in a mansion, and you'll actually be so high, you'll be up in the upper atmosphere. If you're in one corner, you might be in space. You know, some of that stuff seems kind of like it doesn't really make sense, doesn't really fit. So, I just know that when that happens, everything will be different, vastly different. You know,
I know the
when
flat earther camp will say that it will be too big that it won't set. I'm like, well, why won't it just like sink into the earth a little bit? You know?
right.
I mean,
Oh yeah, because they say if it's a globe,
yeah,
it will sit on it, and there'll
it's
be
gonna
like
teeter
space
totter. Yeah,
underneath.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they'll teeter totter. Yeah, yeah, because that's again,
I'm like, I'm sure it'll have good foundations. Be in there a little bit.
yeah. If you want to take it that literally, then what's the problem with it sinking into the earth a
It's
little
got to
bit?
connect to the hollow earth. It's got to get
Yeah,
deep
exactly.
enough. All right, let's move
So,
on to some real questions.
all right.
You kind of even brought it up, like the rapture. Like, how does this affect the second coming? Like the rapture, like everything we know, like the Left Behind series that remember listening to on cassette tape. What happens to all that? You know, in a blink of an eye,
Yeah.
and like you said, the wrath of God, and all these bowls and these judgments.
Um, yeah. So the when you were saying that, it reminded me of another point I wanted to bring up about the futurists, but uh, with the rapture, again, it's convenient to believe that we're going to see this rapture when we have scriptures that say at the final trump that God will descend with his angels, and we will meet the Lord in the air, and there shall we ever be with the Lord. Um, and the problem is people then assume that means we're taken up into heaven, but it never says we're going to heaven. Like, why would we meet the Lord in the air on his return and then just go up
Because
to
he's got a
heaven?
giant city in the air. I don't know. It makes sense.
Well, yeah, but yeah, right. Well, and when he returns, he's going to bring judgment. He's going to come on a white horse with the sword, and he's going to, uh, crush the grapes of wrath, all that sort of stuff. So, in a sense, essentially, we're going to meet him in the air and join the heavenly armies and see the overthrow of the 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 satanic world system
It's been my
and the ushering of
understanding
his
as
kingdom.
well. Is that he'd be taking up for when he comes to, you know, pull the sword out.
Right. Now, these plagues that come down on the earth are not directed at the children of God. We're sealed for protection. That's another thing that comes up is the 144,000 that are sealed is, well, a lot of people like futurists like to say, because they're typically dispensationalists, they'll say, oh, well, that 144,000 are talking about Jews, ethnic Jews. Well, the 144,000 is talking about believers, talking about the children of Israel. If you're a believer, you're part of the children of Israel. And
Grafted in.
so, yeah, the dispensationalists will say, oh, well, you have two people of God. You have the ethnic Jews and you have Gentile Christians, and we're both going to heaven, and we're both, the children, the people of God. You have Israel and the church. Well, if the scriptures don't teach a difference between Israel and the church. Israel has always been, and this is, I mean, no news to you, but Israel has always been the congregation of Israel, or the ecclesia, or the kahal in Hebrew, and you translate that over, and it's just church in English. So it's always about, are you the congregation or the commonwealth of Israel? Are you of the kingdom of God, or are you of the kingdom of the world? There's only two camps there. So 144,000, 12,000 from each tribe is symbolic. And so if you've got this 144,000 sealed, it's referring to all believers are sealed for protection for the coming judgments. And those who took the mark of the beast are the ones receiving. And the beast system is receiving the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. Now, what we have to endure is the great tribulation that Yeshua speaks of. And if you think that there has not been tribulation, it's probably because, like myself, thinking this for the longest time, because I'm an American and I've never really seen true persecution. But when you learn about the Crusades, you learn about the massacre of the Huguenots. You learn about the massacre of the Waldensians, where the Roman armies under the papacy, attacked the Waldensians in the Alps, who were not. They were the forerunners of the Protestants, and would not submit to the Catholic Church, and so they rounded them up and slaughtered them, and took their children and dismembered their children in front of them, and made them carry their children's heads, and horrible things that were done to people. The people that were crucified and burned at the stake, or all these things, because they translated the Bible into English, or all these things. People have been through immense persecution. We talked about the Diocletianic persecution from 303 to 312. That was the 10th of 10 different eras of persecution within the Roman Empire, and that was just up to 313. You have the Holocaust. You have all these things that have occurred to people that are the most horrendous persecution you could think of. So personally, I believe the Great Tribulation refers to the time from when the church was born until the time he returns. Really.
Right.
So you do have the 1,290 days or 60 days, I forget, where 1,260 days where the beast system is given power to trample upon the saints. So that might mark a specific time period of that.
So we didn't really get
But
into Antichrist. So would you say that he's just like the Pope system? Like each Pope is essentially the Antichrist? Is that where you fall with that, or
that's a good
is
question.
that jumping ahead too
Yes. Well, no. I mean, so it is jumping ahead, and because what you have is you have several factors at play. You have the beast, you have the sea beast, okay, you have the earth beast, you have the Antichrist, or the man of lawlessness, you have the false prophet, you have the 10 horns of the beast, you have the 7 heads of the beast. So you're trying to figure out who all these players are and line them up with history, and it's not as easy as just say, oh, the Antichrist is the Pope, because really at the head of this beast is Babylon, Mystery Babylon, and Babylon goes all the way back to Nimrod, who built the first city, Babel, and in Greek it's Babylon. Not the first city, but he built the ziggurat to try to ascend to heaven, and rule over all the earth. And so you saw Cain and Abel, where not Cain and Abel, but Seth and who was the other guy? Was it Enoch? Who Seth was became like a farmer, and Enoch went to the cities, and they started making cities. I don't remember, but point is that you have this
In
division
Nimrod's
where
day.
this is before Nimrod's day, but
Oh,
then in Nimrod's day he built Babel, and so that was where
oh,
this
you're
whole
talking
idea
like pre-flood.
of this.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So spiritual Babylon. So this concept of ascending to God, ascending to take His throne and ruling over the earth, and hating God, which originates from Satan. That was his sin, right? So it all goes back to this Satan type of mentality. And so when you look in Revelation, you see about Mystery Babylon. You can identify Mystery Babylon in the papacy. You can identify it in Nazi Germany. You can identify it in Imperial Rome. Um, you can identify that in probably a lot of different things. Fascist Italy. You could identify it in perhaps even some Christian movements that have delved into mysticism and New Age occult practices. So I definitely will say the papacy is not an office of God. I do think it represents the Antichrist spirit. I don't think that popes are the Antichrist, but I think the office of the papacy is the one that seeks to take the place of Christ, because they even call themselves the vicar or the representative of Christ on earth, and it refer to themselves as Holy Father, Pontifex Maximus, all those sorts of things that we were told not to address each other as that sort of a title, and not to lord over each other. Yet that's the hierarchical system that's at play, and that's what that Mystery Babylon is about. That hierarchical system of one guy at the top who's replacing God. Um, so yeah, maybe we can save that, like the details of that, for another day. But there were two Jesuit priests who came up with preterism and futurism. One of them is this guy who's a Spanish Jesuit. His name was Luis de Alcazar. In 1554 is when he was born.
They're just trying to confuse
And
everybody.
yes,
It's like, you take
yes.
this theory, I'll
So
take this one.
yes. Yeah, well, yeah. So he had this commentary entitled "Vestigio Arcani Sensus," uh, in Apocalypse, or investigation of the hidden sense of the apocalypse, and so that's where he promoted preterism. Then you have Francisco Ribera, who was born in 1537. So basically contemporaries, a Jesuit, doctor of theology in the Roman Catholic Church, and he wrote his commentary on the Book of Revelation. Um, and that's where he promoted the idea of futurism. So most historicists believe that these were basically attempts to remove suspicion from the Catholic Church, because at the time all the Protestants were saying, yeah, they're the beast that Revelation is talking about. And so if you promote preterism and futurism and get people's minds off of that, then you no longer have to deal with this anymore. And it's kind of funny that, since about a year ago, I had never even heard of this. Why hasn't even been a topic of discussion growing up
Right.
as a Protestant?
Well,
Whether it's
like
right
you
or wrong,
said,
I should at least know about it.
there's some of these fulfillments that like everyone agrees on. I think you've talked about a few already, but they seem that ironclad word again. Like how could this not be a fulfillment through history? And what is the goal here? Why is the papacy trying to hide this? Like I was thinking, like the Tower of Babel. Like they just had a flood. So what's the most logical thing to do? We're going to try to build a really tall tower to be above the flood. So they're always trying to like counteract that this destruction. It seems like they know it's coming. They know a second destruction is coming. This judgment's coming on them, and they're
Right.
active. They think they can avoid it. Is that the
Right.
plan?
I don't know, and I want to be clear that I don't think that your everyday Catholic believer is the Antichrist or
They're
operating in an
all in on it.
Antichrist
They're
spirit
all in it.
or is not saved, I do think that your majority of Catholic believers that read their Bible and pray to God and all that sort of stuff are saved and all that sort of stuff. But I would encourage you that if you're in it, that you come out of her, my people, come out of Mystery Babylon, and leave it. And Mystery Babylon, it's going to replace, it's going to change the times and the laws of God. And who is the devil? Who is the dragon trying to attack? Those who hold to the testimony of Yeshua and keep the commandments of God. So when you start saying when you start saying that the Sabbath is done away with and there are no more feast days, instead we need to venerate the sun on Sunday, or um, all these other things that are clearly amalgamations of pagan stuff um, into your worship, then you're changing the times and you're changing the laws. Um, so that is the spirit of Antichrist. But how about we stop there, and we'll come back to that when I have it all figured
I
out
just
one
keep
day.
coming back to it. You can't get away.
I know,
Just
it's my
got you by
fault
the
too.
ankles.
Did you have another question?
I think those were my three questions.
Okay.
You
Well,
asked,
one of the
is
things
it a
that we
new
did talk
theory? You
about.
said it was pretty predominant. It's just, and even I think even her like rapture was like you mentioned 200 years, and it's like I remember somebody saying like the rapture is just like a 200-year-old theory, and I'm like, what?
Oh yeah,
Really? Is it
yeah.
really that new? It's younger
I
than
can't say that.
America.
Right. I can't say I've gone back and looked at all the documentation of that doctrine, but that's probably right. Um, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Okay, because there really is. You're like, oh yeah, it's all over the New Testament. So you start reading, try to find it, and you're like, it's not as clear
Right.
as I thought it was. That's happened to me several times in my life. I'm like, no, I'm gonna go find
Yep.
it. I'm gonna disprove it. And they're like, oh dang,
Yep. Me
there's not
too.
much here.
Well, I want to touch on a couple things. We to kind of cap up this idea of disproving preterism, um, or at least material preterism, which says that the 1,000-year reign already occurred and it was physical, and all of our history has been manipulated. That the Romans did not win in 70 CE. That really God came back then, and so I want to just touch a couple things. So uh, Yeshua said in Luke 19, this is 41 through 44. As Yeshua approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it, and he said, "If only you had known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes. For the days will come on you when your enemies will barricade you, and surround you and hem you in on every side. They will level you to the ground, and you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation from God." So Yeshua is basically proclaiming that there's a judgment that's coming. He's not proclaiming that there's going to come a day when you're going to be barricaded and then God is going to save you and restore the kingdom, like Zechariah talks about on the day when he does return. So instead, he indicates that they didn't recognize the time of his visitation, which is his time where he comes to judge and discern his people. So we know that if we look at the description of the time right before the millennial reign in Zechariah 14, only half of the city goes into exile before God enacts vengeance against Israel's enemies. And there's no temple destruction mentioned in Zechariah 14. So that's vastly different than what happens as described by Yeshua in Luke 19, where he says the temple was to be completely destroyed and the city besieged. Um, yes, in Zechariah 14, there was plundering, there was attacks, probably rapes and besieging, but only half the people were sent into exile before God enacted vengeance, and there was no destruction of the temple. But in 70 CE, complete destruction of the temple, complete destruction of Jerusalem, in complete either annihilation or all people sent into exile.
Yeah, it's been a while since I
Um,
read Zechariah 14, but that's the gist I get is Zechariah 14 is not talking about 70 and the destruction of Jerusalem. It's talking
right,
future event, but that's the
right.
futurist in me
It
maybe,
doesn't.
but
Yeah, well, it's true. It doesn't match 70 CE, so it's got to be this future event. So let me share. Let me share this screen real quick. Assume you can see my screen, okay?
you and your coins. You show me a coin
Yes.
every time.
All right. So uh, Titus conquered Jerusalem and lived to tell about it. So here's a coin. Here's a denarius depicting Titus in
You're watching
around
the Olympics at all?
79.
Isn't that the Arch of
No,
Titus that they show in Paris? Is that, or no, is that something
was
else?
it? I was going to actually bring up that arc here in just a minute. So you can tell me if it is. I haven't been watching it.
You bring it up and I'll
So
let you know.
yeah, yeah. The opposite side shows his triumph in the Judean wars. Um, here's Judea capta, or Judea conquered. Sistertius of Vespasian struck in 71, where they defeated the Jews. And then Arius of Vespasian, Judea defeated. Um, Judea capta coin issued by Agrippa II. So you're telling me that somebody made these coins, made them really old, and planted them deep under the earth to be discovered by archaeologists. And they did this 400 years ago to make up history that all this is fake, and this happened when it
And they're
really didn't.
carbon dated to be 2,000 years old.
Right. So the point is, these events in history happened. The Romans, Jerusalem, and lived to tell about it for many, many, many years. Contrary to what material preterists would say, is that, oh yeah, in 70 CE you had this 3-year conflict, and then God came back. No, they lived to tell about it. So let me
It's
see what
it's
page
hard
I have
enough
the picture
writing
of the
history
arch.
like as a historian, but just like making up stuff. Like as someone who's written a fantasy novel where you gotta make it up, it's so much harder to just make stuff up. Right. Just recording
Yeah,
something, yeah, it's work, but just pulling stuff
right.
out of your butt and trying to make it all match. I don't know if that
Oh my
is. That
gosh.
might be. Is that the Archetitus there?
Yes. Let me see if I can. Yeah, here we go. Trying to zoom in on
It'd be
this.
the one in Paris. I'm not sure if that's. But
Oh,
they pan out every once in a while. Everyone's driving around it, and I was thinking about that the other day. They didn't give me a close up.
okay. Yeah, I think this is Rome. So,
Okay.
um, so there's a panel on here: Roman soldiers carrying Jerusalem temple spoils on parade, including the menorah. Okay, so I'm going to show you that. There it is. High resolution image of that.
Yeah, I don't know.
This
I'm
is
thinking
on the arch.
why would Titus be going to Paris, France? Doesn't make any sense. I retract all my
I don't
thoughts.
know.
It's probably the Napoleonic Arch or something like that.
So this is interesting. You can see, there's the menorah. These might be, I don't know what those are. If they're not temple materials, maybe they're actual Roman ensigns. Um, so yeah, so this proves that Titus conquered Jerusalem and lived to tell about it. Now, material preterists would have you discount all this archaeological evidence. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my screen here. I'm going to turn off sharing. Yeah, so there's that.
It's good evidence.
Yeah, I mean, if you if you discount all archaeological evidence, you can make up stories. But at the end of the day, you can't take all the massive mounds of evidence and discount it and disprove it. It's not in your favor. Same thing with the astronomical dating. So we proved that you can have chronological locks through taking, a cuneiform tablet and an account from a historian, matching it to astronomical software, proving that showing the location, proving that showing the location and the date of the the event matches up with the astronomy on more than one occasion. Now, here's how you would make that up. Here's how you would have to make that up. Somebody would have had to have planted evidence in several locations, carbon dated to that time, historically accurate, and had former knowledge of the mathematical algorithms that would be used in the current day software 400 years ago. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. So we didn't even know how to do these calculations then, 400 years ago. So point is that even as ridiculous it is trying to think about how they would do that. It's a complete impossibility to have fabricated history in that way.
Like, how do people get sucked into these? I mean, I guess like they start poking holes in dispensationalism and futurism, and they're like, see how wrong that is. That's the only answer. And then they're just led on this, and next thing you know, like, oh yeah, you're missing 1,000 years of history. It's all made up, and everyone's in on it.
Well, they might get a truth nugget that is true. They might hear some preterist arguments and be like, it does make sense that what Yeshua said did happen in 70 and not this future thing. And then they're going to try and apply that maybe to another worldview and make, if they believe that it happened then and they believe in literal interpretation of the millennial reign, then they have to believe the millennial reign happened then they have to have this kingdom, and then if they did have this kingdom, there has to be a way to cover it up. And so they're forcing themselves into this position, and I think it's like a drug too, when you get a taste of like some of this knowledge that you think you have that other people don't have. It's like this feeling of like a specialness, and the more you get it, the better you feel about yourself, and it's a big distraction from real study and from doing real life with real people and things that matter. I'm not opposed to intellectual endeavors. I mean, that's part of how we grow. But if that's all it is, and it's just a pursuit of hidden knowledge, then it's a waste of time.
Yes, everyone wants their.
Looks like you have a thought on that.
Their special secret knowledge. It's very addicting, and I know a lot of people.
Yes,
like
it
that.
is.
And it becomes.
But what I love about
this pedestal that they want to put themselves up on, where everyone else is wrong, and they're the only ones that have the right, the true way, and it becomes more about just making fun of the futurists and your standard Christian and putting them down.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
so you could feel better about yourself.
The temptation.
They don't feel good about themselves. That's why. That ultimately what it is about. They don't feel good about themselves. So they have to put down everybody else to make themselves feel better. It's like that girl that's pretty, but she keeps like the ugly chicks around her, so she looks even better.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like this. We all want to be the special, holy people of God that have figured it out and are the righteous ones, the remnant, right? But couldn't it be okay that we're the remnant and we still don't have it all figured out? We're still screwed up.
Heretical Pharisee, personally, but
yeah, right. Exactly. I believe that Protestants, like Luther and other people, probably saved and part of the remnant, even though they had a very limited understanding of things and did some bad stuff. Like people that we would look at maybe 100 years ago and be like, hey, they were off. The Puritans did this, and they were definitely wrong about that. Hey, how could they do that? Or the Quakers, or I don't know about the Quakers, but different. You could name a group and find things you don't
Their
like
oats
about
are
it.
amazing.
I know, right? But I mean, you could find a group and say, well, they were doing this wrong, and like the Waldensians who believed that they needed to live a life of poverty, and so they moved up to the mountains and lived a life of poverty. And some of them, I believe, were celibate. And you could say, well, Scripture does say to give to others, but it doesn't mean you actually have to be in poverty, and it certainly doesn't teach you need to be celibate. Yet they they loved God with all their hearts, and that's what they were doing the best that they thought that they could do. And they're probably a way better person than I am. So I guess like we're all trying to seek to be that remnant, but at some point it's okay to not have all the knowledge figured out. It's okay to just
It's like we all
be
made fun
dumb.
of the Amish, and then COVID hit, and we're like, oh man, I think they know what's going on.
Exactly. So yeah, so we touched on the 70 CE. Um, what was I going to touch on here? Oh yeah, we could go in. We're probably running short on time. Um,
10, 12 minutes.
okay, yeah, perfect. Yeah, so we can talk about the Daniel prophecy, or I can talk about the Romans when they attacked Jerusalem in 70 CE. Where would you rather go?
Romans attacking Jerusalem is always
All
fun.
right.
What was the first
Yes, I was
option
hoping
again?
you'd say that.
Let me see. Okay,
The
we'll go
Daniel
with it.
prophecy, where we go back to the 70 weeks. I mean, we can touch on that next time for sure. It's probably a longer topic.
I might have a better conversation with the siege of Jerusalem. You talk about Daniel, and my eyes just glaze over. I'm like, I don't know anything.
I'm with you.
I should have read my
I'm with you.
Bible.
So, so Yeshua was crucified in the final week of the 70 weeks of Daniel 9, the 490 years between the decree of Cyrus to rebuild Jerusalem until the coming of the Messiah was 69 weeks, which is 483 years, and the final week would take you to 490 years, up to 33 CE. So if he was crucified in 30, you still have a few years. But what you find out is in 33, you have the conversion of Paul, and you have the time of the Gentiles. So Yeshua's ministry was fulfilled by 33, ending the 70 weeks. So that's why I say he did fulfill his 70 weeks. Um, so what you have here is Daniel 9:27. Um, says, he shall make a strong covenant with many. And this is going into the Romans thing. I'm actually not going to stay on Daniel here, but he make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So that was the ESV. I want to read it in the Brenton Septuagint translation. And 1 week shall establish the covenant with many, and in the midst of the week my sacrifice and drink offering shall be taken away, and on the temple shall be the abomination of desolations, and at the end of time an end shall be put to the desolation. So in this final week, Yeshua confirmed the everlasting covenant um, and the Daniel 9 prophecy of his first coming. And in the midst of the week, he put an end to sacrifice. His work was the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. It was finished. And when he said it is finished. Now, at the consummation of all prophecy, in Revelation 21:6, he also will say this again, it is finished. So when he put an end to sacrifice, it doesn't mean that all the sacrificial systems of the Levitical priesthood were done away with. It means he accomplished the sacrifice that he intended to accomplish according to his priesthood, the heavenly priesthood, right? Because he's of the order of Melchizedek, not the order of Levi. So this had no effect on Levitical sacrifices, which is why the apostles continue to make offerings in the temple, which is why Paul agreed to join and pay the cost for him and like 4 others to do a Nazirite vow, which was a very expensive thing to do, which included sin offerings at the tabernacle, which he was commanded to do by the apostles, and he agreed to do. So we have clear evidence in Acts that Paul continued to participate in the temple sacrifices. So this wasn't saying that when Yeshua came, he would do away with the Levitical priesthood. That was a promise given to the Levites, extended to Phineas and Zadok, that would last even through the millennial reign. So, and we could see that evidence in Ezekiel. What it's talking about is the work that he did in the heavenly realm was completed, and he made atonement for sin. So I just needed to touch on that real quick, so we didn't think that, well, that's when all the Levitical sacrifices were abolished. They weren't. So
It sounds like they should read
he
your
said,
first book to understand that more.
Yeah, that's what the first
Yeshua's
book's about.
ministry and
The
the
Deuteros man, or the
yes.
second Adam, translate it. So he does say in 27, he talks about the wing of abominations. It's the Hebrew word is kanaf. You think of when Yeshua was outstretched and having his hands pierced and nailed to the cross. Um,
Wings.
it was as if he were outstretching wings. And remember, he said he wanted to gather Jerusalem like a hen gathers his chicks, her chicks under her wings. And so in the Greek, it reads temple, which is also appropriate because Yeshua referred to raising his temple up in 3 days, referring to his body in John 2:19. So the imagery here um, of a wing of abomination can apply to the abomination done on Yeshua's body when they crucified him. So I believe that his crucifixion was the ultimate abomination that led to the desolation of God's house and Jerusalem. Um, when Judah
Did you
rejected their
just tell
Savior.
me Jesus was the abomination of desolation?
I think that Yeshua was a fulfillment of
It's another hot take,
the
Daniel.
abomination of desolation,
I
the
like it.
ultimate fulfillment of
I like it.
it. Yeah. Well, I mean, how much more abominable can you get than crucifying the Son of God?
It makes sense. It's just gonna be. It's hard for
Pretty bad.
people to wrap their minds around.
So
It's like
my
telling people they're
caveat is
part
that
of
I
the
think
the family of Israel. They're just like, oh, oh, honey,
I'm not
you're
Jewish. Yeah,
confused.
I know, right? You're confused. Yeah, they'll think, no, I've racked my brain over
You
this for
just want to
years
be
now.
special.
Right.
You want to be a heretical Pharisee. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So he is the ultimate. Okay, Yeshua's not the abomination, but his crucifixion was the abomination
Yes,
that led to the
yes, yes.
desolation of God's house. Um, all right, so this created a spiritual desolation. Remember, Yahweh, he tore the veil in the temple, which is an act of keriah or mourning. When someone dies that you love, you mourn, you rip your garments. That's a keriah. Will the
That's
train
what
of his robe
Caiaphas
fill the
did too,
temple?
right? When
When the veil tore, it was God tearing his robe at the death of his son. Um, so now, when the temple was destroyed in 70, that did stop the daily offerings, obviously. But we can't ignore also just the plain reading. So, kind of stepping away from the spiritual fulfillment of that, it says, "And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate." So, and on the temple shall be the abomination of desolation. So, let's look at this from not the spiritual level of Yeshua's body, but let's look at the physical, practical level of the temple and Jerusalem. So 40 years after the crucifixion, the Romans did come. The desolator did come, and they carried incense, and on their incense were abominable graven images, most notably the Aquila. So I'm going to share this. There we go, and then I'm gonna. Here we go. So so the eagle, the Aquila, was the ensign for a legion. They offered pigs and other animals on the eastern gate or wing or extremity of the temple before completely destroying it. All right, so that was fulfilled in two ways: one in 30 CE and one in 70 with the Romans coming. So here's an example of an aquilifer or eagle bearer, which is the standard for a legion. Um, Here is the imaginifer or image bearer, the image of the emperor. So if you look closely here, oh man, I do not know how to use this. Come on now.
I don't know if this will redeem my whole messing up the Titus arch thing, but I know like just it is a similar arch to the Arch of Titus that they have
There
in
are two, and I
Paris,
can't remember where
but
the other one
also the
is.
eagle. I know in the Napoleonic Wars, France carried the eagle as well
Oh,
as one of their
fascinating.
standards. I don't know if there's something there to dive into, but
Right.
capturing the eagle
Well,
was a great offense. You know, if a British officer was able to capture the eagle.
yes. Um, And so you think about in Revelation, it talks about the image of the beast. Well, a Roman army would always march carrying the image of their god, their emperor. If you look closely, you can see his face. It's the golden head of the emperor right there. Um, yeah. Is that close enough? Could you see it?
Yeah, I can see it, and I can even zoom in on it when I do some editing.
There.
There we go.
There we go. So yeah, guy looks like he's happy. Um,
It's got the
there's
head
your
of an
standard
emperor. Why wouldn't it
bearer.
be?
Yeah, right. Um, they might march in with the SPQR, which you'll see in certain Catholic parades today. I saw a picture of one marching in with the SPQR ensign. I can't remember what it stands for. Oh yeah, it means I've got it right here. An initialism for Senatus Populesque Romanus, referring to the government of the Roman Republic. So you tell me, why would a Catholic parade carry an ensign that says SBQR on it if they're still not representing Rome? So here's the signifer, standard bearer for a signum, which is a standard for a maniple or 2 centuries. A century is 100 men. There's a picture of a Roman standard, the Aquila. Now here's a later ensign. The Draco was a later 2nd century ensign for a cohort or 40 soldiers. Emperor Trajan first adopted this ensign after defeating the Dacians, which is modern day Romania. This dragon ensign became a common standard, and Constantine's son, Emperor Constantius, had a personal Draco sewn from purple material. So now you're getting purple, the dragon. So carried over to the Byzantine Empire. It's continued in use in the Caucasus and Georgia, west with the Franks under Charlemagne, and currently is the red dragon of modern Wales. So there's a symbolic link, possibly, to the dragon of Revelation 12, the red dragon with 7 heads. Yeah, you can see the pictures here. Yeah, so I'm just gonna leave that there. Maybe zoom out here. So I'll leave this up so we can read it together. So when he told them to flee the mountains when they saw it, he said, when you see that standing in the holy place, the abomination of desolation, described by the prophet Daniel, and let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. He repeats this in other passages as well. He says here, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, Luke is good because he gives you a little more information. He says, oh, he's connecting these two, and he adds this, surrounded by armies, you'll know her desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out. These are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. Remember, the days of vengeance is a thematic descriptor used in many places to describe a coming judgment, not a one-time event. So it will be in the holy place, standing where it should not be, and described as Jerusalem being surrounded by armies. So I'm going to skip this because Daniel, in the book of Daniel, there are at least 3 different abominations spoken of. And so I was racking my brain trying to figure out, well, which abomination was he talking about here? And it's short answer is Daniel 9:27. So you can look at that, or we can go into it later. And I tried to apply that to the timeline of the siege. But I know we're on short of time, so I want to go over real quick the timeline of the siege. So these ensigns were graven images of idols. Here's what Josephus says. Now the Romans, upon the flight of the seditious into the city, and upon the burning of the holy house itself, and of all the buildings round about it, brought their ensigns to the temple, set them over against its eastern gate, and they did there offer sacrifices to them, and make Titus imperator with the greatest acclamations of joy. So when you make someone an imperator, you perform a suivatoria. And in ancient Rome, the suivatoria was practiced consisting in sacrificing to the god of war, or Mars, a pig, a sheep, and a bull. In this way, they wanted to gain his support and purify the earth. It was also performed when the temple was destroyed and a new tabernacle was to be erected in its place. So this was carried out in 69 when the Capitol burned down during the fight for the Roman throne. So yeah, point is, this is the type of thing they did. Here's a kind of a relief of like a souvenir right here. So you have your pig, you have your sheep, you have your bull. So it's this pagan sacrifice that they did do on the eastern wing of the temple while they were carrying their idolatrous images surrounding the city. So the first sign, when you said, look out for these armies surrounding Jerusalem, was with Cestius in November of 66 during the First Jewish-Roman War. So this is when the war started. Gaius Cestius Gallus, the governor of Syria, set out in 66 in autumn. He had 30,000 troops, arrived at Mount Scopus, northeast of Jerusalem, and then advanced on Jerusalem. Now, here's what happened. Let's see here. The Biblical Archaeologist Journal says he burned and pillaged his way to Jerusalem, where the Zealots had withdrawn behind the walls of the inner city. Gallus advanced to the second wall and camped outside the royal palace in the upper city. For 5 days, the Romans stormed the walls of the Temple Mount. On the sixth, they succeeded in undermining the north wall. With victory in reach, Gallus ordered a retreat. Possibly he was bribed by Florus. Possibly he feared being caught in hostile country with winter approaching. Whatever the reasons, the decision was disastrous. Retreat swiftly became rout. Caught in the mountain passes, the Roman troops were savaged by the rebels. By the time Gallus reached Antioch, he had lost the better part of his baggage train, the war chest, the standard, and 6,000 men. So the Romans had it in the bag, and then they got a little spooked, retreated, and then got routed. So before he left Jerusalem, he left 400 men behind to hold standard, so they pretended that the whole army was there, basically while they regrouped. So with orders to fly their colors and pretend that the whole of the army was still at Beth Horon. Now, this is probably when the believers fled like Yeshua told them to. They saw this happening. All right, guys, we're surrounded by armies.
4-year
Well,
war.
let's get out of here. Yeah, they had plenty of time at this point. They had a good gap. So Eusebius talks about this, but the people of the church in Jerusalem had been commanded by a revelation, vouchsafed to approved men there before the war, to leave the city and to dwell in a certain town of Perea, called Pella, a town situated beyond the Jordan in the north of Perea. And when those that believed in Christ had come thither from Jerusalem, then as if the royal city of the Jews and the whole land of Judea were entirely destitute of holy men, the judgment of God at length overtook those who had committed such outrages against Christ and his apostles, and totally destroyed that generation of impious men. The Panarion of Epiphanius of Salamis says, this sect of the Nazarenes is to be found in Berea, near Coelesyria, and the Decapolis near Pella, and in the Bashanitis at the place called Kokabe. For that was its place of origin, since all the disciples had settled in Pella after their remove from Jerusalem. Christ having told them to abandon Jerusalem, withdraw from it because the siege was about to undergo, and they settled in Perea for this reason. From this that the Nazarene sect had its origin. So now you see they're referring to the Nazarenes, and a lot of these people like Epiphanius and these other church fathers didn't necessarily agree with Nazarenes because they would maybe call them Judaizers later when they became westernized. As part of the departure between the early believers that followed Yeshua and kept all the feast days and the Sabbath, and then the westernization of Christianity that took hold. So, and then this is also spoken of, again, I probably don't need to read that. Yeah. So following Cestius' defeat, Nero sent General Vespasian 67 to crush the rebellion. Beginning in the northern region of Galilee, joined by his son Titus, they set their eyes on Judea in 68, 69. He became emperor and left Titus to take care of the revolt. Cool picture. So now I have just the timeline of the events, and we don't have to go through all that, but it just kind of shows what happened during the actual battles. Here's a little chart showing that. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just saying, Titus is looking like a beast. Beast of Revelation.
Looking beastly.
Oh.
Nice little AI beast. You can follow the timelines through Josephus and Maccabees and kind of figure out, well, the siege began on April 14th of 70, breached the middle walls on June 4th, daily sacrifice taken away. what you do if you follow this, you kind of see that the Daniel abomination of the 3.5 year timeline doesn't fit exactly the timeline of events here. So that's one of the reasons I determined that prophecy was not fulfilled in 70 CE, and that there's probably a future fulfillment of that 1,260 days. Um, Actually, 1,290, and then the 1,335 days. That you see, those are such confusing numbers when you look at those. Yeah. So now that
That's what
we've
you're here
kind
for.
of,
You need to fix the confusion. I see.
you'll have to wait till the book comes out for that one.
I'm seeing, yeah, I'm looking at the book here. I see Passion Week is next. Is that connected in a way to what we're seeing here with
Yeah.
the destruction of Jerusalem?
So what I determined was that, okay, so you have the book of Daniel. Let me stop sharing for a second. Um, and if we're going to take the 70 weeks of Daniel and we're going to try to line it up with history, then that amount of time should match the crucifixion. But people disagree on when the crucifixion occurred. Okay, so if it's okay, so if it's 483 years, okay, the 69 weeks before the Messiah shows up, okay, then you can determine, well, we should be able to figure out when Messiah's ministry began. If we can figure out his ministry, we can figure out when his birthday was, we can figure out when the right date for the crucifixion was. So in my studies of Daniel, I determined I need to go in deeper to find my position on this. And when I went to do that, it led me into, well, let's figure out, like, what was this 3 days and 3 nights thing? What did that mean? Was Yeshua crucified on a Wednesday, a Thursday, a Friday? Where did these traditions come from? Um, and and then it also brought up the supper controversy. So the Last Supper controversy is just basically this idea that the Gospels disagree on when the crucifixion took place. And by golly, if the Gospels disagree on when the crucifixion took place, and essentially when the Last Supper was, how can we trust the Bible or any of the prophecies? Yeah, how can we trust the Bible or any of the prophecies if the Gospels don't agree? So I was like, all right, we have to harmonize the Gospels and figure out when did the Last Supper occur. Is John really disagreeing with the Synoptic Gospels? And what I concluded was, no, John was not disagreeing with the Synoptic Gospels. So we can dive into
That
that
sounds like a
sometime.
podcast to me. No reason to wait for Passover. Let's hit that soon.
Yeah. All right. That sounds good. Thanks for having me on again, Dr. Klein.
Yeah, went much better this time. No
It's been
drops.
fun. Yeah. Yeah. Internet. Yeah.
All right. Good
So,
work.
all things working well.
Thanks for
Thank you,
sharing
sir.
your work with us. And we'll try
My
to get some
pleasure.
links for everyone on the things you mentioned. I'll track them down for you.
Oh, and if you want to dive into something in your meantime,
Yes.
look up what Kaiser means in
Kaiser.
German. What does it sound like?
Like a roll. Kaiser roll.
Caesar. And then look up what the Reich represents, which is the German Empire,
I
and
did
where
know
the
that
German
one.
Empire
Because
came
it's
from,
the Third Reich.
which
It's
is,
the Third Roman Empire.
yes. So we're all still in the fourth beast, man, of Daniel. And it's all here.
So the
It's
papacy
crazy.
essentially is like the Fourth Roman Empire.
Um, yeah. So,
The Fourth
well,
Reich.
let's just say Rome. And within Rome, you have Imperial Rome, you have Papal Rome, you have Holy Roman Empire, and you have potentially what you could determine to be Nazi Germany, the different manifestations or expressions of that beast. But it's all still that beast. It's also that fourth kingdom.
Makes me think of that book. I always meant to read it, but I always thought it was intriguing. I know they did a show called The Man in the High Tower, where essentially it was that
Oh yeah.
Hitler won. But what you're saying to me is he did. Essentially, it continues on
Well,
in a way. Yeah.
yeah, because the spirit behind that.
Another
another day.
Antichrist, I'm sure, right? All right.
Thanks again, Dr. Klein.
I'll let you get some
See you
sleep.
later.
Take care.
It's not a flex, just need a little cultural context. It's not complex. Oh, can't you see? It's not a heresy. Be a Pharisee. Oh, no, 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 no. I'm just like he. Yeah, yeah. Pharisee. Heresy. To be set apart. It's not an art. I just put the horse before the cart. You wanna be servant, but you're not observant like the Pharisee. Oh, no, 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 I'm just like he. Hey, yeah, heresy, Pharisee. I'm a Pharisee follower. DC talk told me love's a verb, and that's why I observe the Torah, just like Yeshua. Shema, Zedekiah, Emunah, and Teshuvah. Shema, Zedekiah, Emunah, and Teshuvah. Just like Yeshua. The greatest of the Pharisees. Oh yeah. I just wanna be like he.